Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Where we've been looking at Luke 15. In our previous session, we looked at the verses 11, 12, and 13 as a story of Jesus beginning to set a context for where he is driving this whole parable that he's been now telling in three different parts. And I want to continue with that today, where we've been looking at the next three verses, verse 14, 15, and 16. And it says that after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. You know, I think so many times we're familiar with this parable. We've heard this enough times, and so many times we read over it. But I think we're missing out on something in these three verses that was probably so profound, so deep, that Jesus wanted them to really understand in that day. Because as we've said this before so many times, Jesus was addressing this whole parable to the Pharisees, to teachers of the law. And in their minds, a sinner was not somebody to be sought after, like Jesus was saying in the lost sheep. To them, a lost sinner was not somebody that they wanted to find. Jesus was telling that in the lost coin. They found it. No. For them, a sinner was somebody to be left alone. It was somebody to be walked past, to be disregarded. It's only if that sinner, by his own recognition, comes to the temple on the Day of Atonement, probably, and brings an animal to be slaughtered on behalf of his sin, then maybe he would buy the favor of the Pharisees. That once a year, when the high priest would cut the animal and then the blood of the lamb would now cover him, then the Pharisees would say, okay, now you are found, now you are saved, you all come back in the community. That's the disregard that the Pharisees had towards them. And this is what now Jesus is addressing. It's almost like Jesus is playing into their camp, into their hands, because when Jesus tells this story, they probably all nodded in agreement, in affirmation with what Jesus was saying. Because now he starts here in verse 14, where he says, and he had spent everything. Now, this word spent doesn't mean that he just spent a little money here and spent a little money there until all of his money dried up. In the Greek, Jesus uses a very strong word that literally means he threw the money away. He didn't sow, he threw. He threw that away. And it was such a wasteful, extravagant spending. And Jesus says, after he had done this, just this extravagant living, it says two things happened to him. Two disasters struck this young man simultaneously. The first one says he had no more money, spent all his money. And secondly, it says there was a famine that hit the land. So all of a sudden, the realities of life just hit this young man all at the same time. See, he was able for a short period of time to just kind of live in this unreal world supported by his daddy's money. And however, now he ran out of money. His dream world, his fantasy, everything was just shattered. He didn't have a job. He didn't have any savings. He didn't have any family. He didn't have any friends. Though he had a good time, he was now utterly unprepared for all these contingencies of life. Now, Jesus also says this wasn't just a famine. He speaks about a severe famine. This word that Jesus used there would probably equate to the same level that the Pharisees would understand, that would be on the same level of famine that was when Joseph became the king of Egypt, prince of Egypt. And it's probably the same level of famine that Moses had in Egypt. And so he was trying to create a picture to them of utter deprivation, devastation that somebody was going through, a severe famine. So here's this young man. Money was tight, food was scarce, there was no help, and he began to be in need. Scripture says in verse 16, he began to be in need. And now listen to this in verse 15. He says, so he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, which means he was in a foreign country that we now know. He went off to a far country, but that would probably mean he didn't speak the language. Maybe he did, maybe he learned the language. We know probably because he's he's a Jew, that he spoke Hebrew, maybe he spoke Aramaic. And here he now kind of binds himself to a citizen of a different country. That literally means he wasn't sold into slavery. He put himself into slavery. He willfully went to become a servant or a slave to somebody in that country. And therefore, he would probably be treated just like any other slave that master from that household might have had. And then it even goes worse. It says that this owner, this citizen, sent him to go and work with the pigs, to go feed the pigs. And now we already just see this picture of a young man that was a Jew. And if we know anything about the customs of their day and where he's from, that even for him to just touch a pig as a Jew, would he consider to become unclean? The laws of his day said he would probably have to go outside the village. He would have to go through a ritual bath. He had to stay there for a couple of days. Then he can come back ritually clean to take back his position. That was just touching a pig. Now all of a sudden, he's not only touching a pig, he's not only herding the pigs, he's herding with the pigs. He's probably sleeping with them. He's probably starting to smell like them. I mean, he couldn't reach another level of degradation. You see, feeding pigs was such an unclean occupation for a Jew. And here this young man now all of a sudden finds himself that not only is his physical circumstances that he's lacking, it's also spiritual. As a Jew, he now has to deal with this, I'm giving up my spiritual beliefs to kind of do this job. He finds himself socially lost because now he doesn't have any friends. All his friends have left him because he didn't have any money anymore. All of a sudden he found himself relationally lost because now we know that he's been cut off from his family, and in his mind he's sitting with this idea, my family has ostracized me, and not only did they ostracize me, I chose that. I asked them to do that when I said to my father, give me my inheritance, I don't want anything to do with you. And so here he finds himself now just hungry. It says he finds himself hungry for the pods that these pigs are eating. What was these pods? These pods were probably just carob pods because that was considered the feed of the day, kind of a little thorny looking fruit that was given to pigs. And not only did pigs eat that, but also the very lowest class of people would eat that. So he finds himself going from this probably rich family because his father had lots to offer. And all of a sudden he finds himself from there to here in the lowest classes, eating that kind of food, spiritually, just everything about him is just lost. And so we find that he sits there with these cravings, and it says he longed for, he was hungry for. Now that word, he longed for, very strong word again. I mean, I suppose we miss out what Jesus was saying. He was saying such a strong thing here because that word longs to fill, longs to eat. It literally means that in the Greek it means to fill the innermost cavities of a man. And to them it was not only a physical term, it was also a spiritual term, speaking about filling into the deepest cavities of a man's soul, of who he was. You see, this is the madness of sin that was seen in this prodigal's continuing attempts to just find satisfaction. And he was trying to do it apart from his father. And having consumed his wealth in this reckless living, having been reduced to feeding pigs in this far country, he has not yet returned to God. Instead, he yearns to satisfy just his cravings with the pods of the pigs. He's even willing to go deeper into that deprivation. I mean, that slop which the hogs were fed. He was even ready to go eat that. He just wasn't ready to go back to God, and he will instead just plunge further and further into degradation, humiliation, into this excess, and he will try and do everything he can just to fill that. Yet it was futile. Satisfaction just eluded him, and there was no one to help him, no friends. So what's the point? Why was Jesus emphasizing these three verses so much? You see, Jesus means to just paint a picture of degradation in its deepest depths. The prodigal presents a straightforward picture of a lost soul, and Jesus was trying to give them a picture of what sin aims to do in life, what sin does to us, where it's headed at this point. And you note the Pharisees and the scribes would probably agree. They would probably all be sitting there nodding their heads, listening to Jesus intently. Maybe Jesus lost them a little with the lost sheep and the lost coin, but all of a sudden he had their attention again. Yes, Jesus, we agree with you about that sinner. They are like swine. They are unclean. They foul. And Jesus doesn't whitewash the condition. Jesus calls a spade a spade. He says, this is what it is. Sin has reduced them to a pigsty. It's just, Jesus never really waters down sin. He calls it evil. And at the same time, what Jesus was trying to say to them is, this lost, these desperate prodigals, represents the people with whom Jesus were mingling. These were probably the people sitting around Jesus at that time as he was addressing the Pharisees. These are the ones, he says, I love. These are the ones that were listening to him. These are the ones that he was seeking to save. And so in verse 17, we then now read these famous words, and he came to himself. See, he speaks about a degradation that circumstance will probably bring you to that point. Hunger will probably bring you to that point. Lack will probably bring you to that point. Spiritual emptiness will bring you to that point. There are so many things that leads us to that point of salvation. For each person, their story of how they got to know the Lord was different. But there was a seeking. There was a hunger. There was a lack. There was something that they wanted in their lives that was unfulfilled. And then the scripture says that he came to himself. In our next session, I want us to look deeper into this idea of what does it mean to come to oneself. So let this be an introduction, a context just of these three verses that Jesus put so much emphasis on in us understanding where he is now taking us, because he's kind of giving us the picture of what sin is and how to let go. And now what does it mean to grab onto something new? So let's look at that in our next session. God bless.
If you've been blessed by this video, subscribe to our channel today by pressing the subscribe button below.